Welcome, everybody, to our Global Leaders Series webinar. Today on navigating the pandemic, where we'll be looking at things from the perspective of the Supervisory Board. My name is Katell. I head the Hoffman Institute here at INSEAD, an institute which has for a mission to integrate sustainability in everything that the school does. So we'll be also talking about sustainability today. And to do that, I'm delighted to welcome Barbara Cooks with us today. She sits on many boards. She has promoted sustainability there. She has brought women there as well. All these themes will be unpacking. And to do that, I am also delighted to welcome three students. Sol Park, who is our impact leader. She is the president of the Endeavor Club here at INSEAD. Anna Donahier, who is a seasoned strategic consultant and who is leading the INSEAD Women in Business Club at INSEAD. And Maxime Marnotte, who is our operation person, an experienced team manager who is the head of the industry club here at INSEAD. Welcome to all of you. So again, our special guest today is Barbara Cooks. Barbara is a member of the board of directors at the governance group, Henkel, Pargesa Holding, as well as the vice chairman of Firmenich. She was before that a member of the Siemens Managing Board and the Philips Management Committee. So you can see she's our board rock star. So this is what we'll be talking about. And she's been bringing that expertise to INSEAD as well, where she's engaged in our advisory council. And she's also a director in residence on corporate governance here at INSEAD. She's also passing on that passion and expertise to other leaders through a company, Coaching for Vision. She's an expert on sustainability, supply chain management, and emerging market. And you can check more of all this on her website at barbaracooks.com. And of course, Barbara is an alumna from INSEAD. Welcome home, Barbara.
Great to see you, Katell. Fantastic. And it's always a pleasure for me to be in touch with INSEAD, the students, the alumni, and also to see you back, Katell. We will have a great conversation. I really look forward also with the student participation.
Plaisir partagé. So Barbara, where are you coming? Are you calling us from? I'm in Fontainebleau in my house. Where are you from today?
Actually, I'm in my board office in Zurich, where I have to say, I spent most of the last weeks since middle of March. And you know, when we all saw these terrible photos from Italian hospitals in March, I have to say, I'm not a fearful person, but I had a lot of respect of COVID-19. And the way I survived was obviously in this office, in my home also, which is nearby, but also by trying to get a lot of information about COVID-19. And that helped me a little bit to overcome, let's say, the respect and the fear. The other thing that helped me a lot is the network with friends and family, a number of them also from my INSEAD time or from the time I have been active with the alumni network. The other thing that also has helped me a lot was cartoons, you know, because humor helps a lot.
Which cartoons? Give us some tips. Which cartoons were these?
You know, WhatsApp was perfect, and I got so many from different angles, and it was just always great. And the last thing that has also obviously helped me, that somehow I have a built-in optimism, and I think that was quite useful in this time. So here I'm in my board office, has proven it works well also in COVID-19.
Thanks, Barbara. We can even feel your enthusiasm here through Zoom, and that's a hard thing to do. We've all had a lot of Zoom meetings. It's hard to do. I introduced your very impressive resume very succinctly. Something else that really piqued my attention in your resume, Barbara, is how you involve with many diverse organizations, public, private, non-for-profit. So as an MBA and a business person, why are you involved in so many initiatives? Can you give us a sense?
Yes, I think it's, you know, we learned this at INSEAD actually. I remember we had these political courses with Jonathan Story. You know, sometimes he's still teaching, he wrote a lot of books. We had the macroeconomics, so we really always saw the broader picture. I think that has helped. The other thing that has helped me, that my father was a journalist on Russia and China. So we were always, you know, very involved also in the political matters of the world. And to be very honest, I think today for business people, it's so important to look at the full picture. And you know, one of the problems with COVID-19, and people say it's the unknown unknown. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I say it should have been the known unknown, because in a way, with all the intelligence systems we have today, it should have been known unknown. But I think it's even more important for companies and also for managers to reach out to fully understand, you know, what's going on in politics in China, in the European Union, in Washington, what's going on in other areas, what's going on with the NGOs. I think it's so important to reach out. And it was very good, because during my MBA, we were able with Yves Doos to make a study at that time for the European Union. And so they asked me 3 years ago to be part of a high-level panel to establish the plan for decarbonization of Europe, which also now is the base of the green funding and all of that is planned. And then the other thing, Jeff Sachs, an economy professor in the US, who has elaborated the SDGs for Ban Ki-moon, the Sustainable Development Goals. Today, people know them. They're 17, by the way. And I was part of that team as well, because I think today you have to see the world, not just, you know, linked to the specific business, but I think in order to be, really successful, but also in order to enrich yourself, it's so important to see the bigger picture.
Thanks, Barbara. I think it's one first important lesson. I mean, the crisis that we're facing now is a systemic crisis. So to be better able to respond, you need to be able to connect the dot and to have that big picture. So thanks for reminding us of the need to look elsewhere and be involved in different initiatives. So carrying on your overview, your overall big picture view of the pandemic, could you tell us a little bit more about its impact across sectors and across industries? As I mentioned, you're part of all these boards that are from different industries. How has that pandemic affected these industries in different ways and in different regions?
Well, first of all, obviously, also as a board, we had to ensure that in the companies we are involved in is a very good crisis plan in place, protecting the teams, the employees, the suppliers, the customers, but also the health of the company as such. And so it was very important just to be sure, you know, that this was there. And in most of my boards, you know, we had a weekly update from the CEO on where things are. And the other important role also was to offer support, you know, in terms of moral support. We are here with you, we are here with the teams, tell us if we can do anything to help you, we are here. I think that was important in that, you know, high time crisis phase. What's coming now is, you know, we all have to do, we as people, governments, organization, companies, we have to set the reset button, you know, push the reset button, because certainly things have changed. And I see specifically two areas. One is the kind of deceleration, you know, slowing down. It has obviously shown with the work we're doing, the remote work. I think at certain moments you felt like, you know, the business world was basically put to bed, which obviously wasn't true, but I think the deceleration is an important element. And my personality is totally the opposite, but and I would have never thought that actually deceleration sometimes can lead to better decisions or better thoughts. So that deceleration, but at the other end, the acceleration, and specifically on the disruptive industries. Look at the crash course we all had, you know, elderly people, 80 years old, using Zoom. The crash course we all had, boards are just AGMs, it's all done in a digital way. So the crash course we had in digitization, and I think to combine these two, that will be a challenge, but certainly going forward, you know, all businesses really now have to review their strategy and have a very good look at also what are the sweet spots and what are the opportunities. And I can just tell you, there are lots of opportunities looking forward.
So can you give us a little bit more of a sense and unpack these opportunities that you see coming up? And also if you can spend a little bit of time showing what are the main risks that you see happening.
Yes, I mean, the opportunities are pretty straightforward. You know, the big pocket obviously is in healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so impressed to see that there are 200 projects that are working on the vaccine. I mean, it makes you really feel good. And they kind of came out like mushrooms in 3 weeks time. It was just impressive. The European Union in a record time collected, I think, 8 billion to support it as a start. So, so healthcare obviously is a big topic in this, also linking it to aging society and so on, but also future pandemics. How can we prevent? What can we do about it? And the other area, of course, is the whole area of digitization. And when you look now, how the online business has moved up so tremendously. So many of these hurdles and kind of hindering blocks that we have had in society, but also in companies, no, you cannot, it's too risky and so on. In like 2 weeks time, AGM, digital, no question, we do it. So this digital area, I think, is certainly another big picture. I think anything that has to do with hygiene, nowadays when I look at markets, it's disinfectant soaps or hand creams. And so this whole area of hygiene and safety, I think, will become more important. And lastly, consumers are changing, and the impact has been tremendous. They will not completely change, of course, but I think for companies today, it's very difficult actually to make your strategy. But what you need to do, you have to have very good intelligence, you have to be agile and flexible. If there is an opportunity, go for it. But you also have to look at the resilience of your company, of your balance sheet for the future.
And in terms of those industries that are more, more at risks, more exposed in the medium term, what have you seen? What are you seeing there in terms of these trends?
There are really 3 camps. The one camp is the winners, Zoom, HelloFresh, Amazon, and so on. There are many more, Moderna, Gilead Science, etc. So there's a big winning pocket actually. Then there's the ones that kind of, go through it. And then there's the third one. And the third one is mostly industries and companies that have been affected anyhow. And that's very, very difficult for them. And now obviously the change is forced upon them and they have to move even faster. But looking at, the funding that has been done in Switzerland by the European Union, by Germany, different countries, France, and so on, I think that now plans, recovery fundings are being made so that these companies that, are in industries with a limited future are making the right choices today to safeguard, their future and also the future for at least, let's say, a nice part of the employees.
Thanks, Barbara. So as part of all these companies' response, having been involved in their board, in driving or accompanying them, are you seeing any common coping strategy that have been put in place across these industries? And could you give us some ingredients of what this coping strategy look like?
The COVID strategy? I didn't quite understand you.
Coping strategy. How will the company cope with and respond and rebound?
Yeah, I mean, the coping, in my view, wasn't really a strategy, but it was a crisis plan. A crisis plan, you don't have a lot of time. For strategy, you need more time. Strategy is more long term. But all the companies really immediately worked on a crisis plan, and that was quite difficult to establish because nobody really had a lot of information what was coming up. So how to make a plan? But I think obviously what most companies did, firstly protect the employees and their health with allowing remote work, look at which factors really need to operate and so on. But then also to look at the health of the company in terms of balance sheet, liquidity, and so on. And I can tell you, this has been something we forgot a bit in the last 20 years because, interest rates are so low, so debt is very cheap. And I remember, 20 or 30 years ago, you would always have a reserve. in your balance sheet, and you would have a reserve on your liquidity to cope with crisis. But all this sort of, I would say, almost a little bit fat, you would call it today, has disappeared because we just looked at, shareholder value, short-term valuation of companies, stock market, and so on. And I think now companies really also have to relook at that. I've seen many examples of companies, also some in my board portfolio. I'm very proud of them because they have, for instance, used factories to make disinfectants, or to have made donation for healthcare systems and things like that. And I think that's also the role of companies in these crisis times, to think bigger and to see what can be done for society at large in this case. And obviously then the third point is to look at your supply chain. Supply chains have been extremely affected by it. I remember the time when we had the Fukushima. I was responsible for the supply chain in Siemens, and that was not easy. We were able to do relatively well with it, but it wasn't an easy time. And today it's even more challenging, and really to think, how do we have to build it? I think it's very good that now the European Union, for instance, thinks of what can we do with PPE, so the whole protective equipment, masks, disinfectants, and all of that. Do we have to have a bit more manufacturing reserves in Europe and so on? So I think there are also some good things coming out of that in terms of making a supply chain more resilient for the future.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's an important, we've had actually conversations around that in the webinar series. That's an important point. And my final question on the impact is around any geographical difference that you've seen in terms of how this impact will play out, or in the response front?
Well, when I look at at the world as a whole, the pandemic crisis is a global crisis. And it has affected the world in a very short lapse of time. So, and obviously it came more in Europe, south, north. And the interesting part is to see those countries that have tried to address it on a purely national level. And I'm looking at the US, I'm looking at the UK, I'm looking at China, I'm also looking at Brazil as examples. They have really done their own game or their own plan without really reaching out. And those countries actually have done not so good, as for at least up to now. And interestingly, in Europe, as the crisis really moved up from south to north, so not all European Union countries have been affected in one go, but it has sort of developed. And the more north you were, the more you could look at how that is, in Italy or in the southern countries, and the more you could prepare. But I think what was interesting to see that the European Union countries started very much in a national way. Yes, Germany, France, and so on. The French President Macron, who said c'est la guerre. Merkel, who tried to make it a bit, less impressive, and so on. So everybody had, based on also the culture, his way forward. But now it's interesting to see, now you start to see more search for European solutions. And I give examples, border regulations. It's difficult to do it on a country standalone basis. So that there are discussions ongoing. The recovery funding, of course, everybody likes to have the pocket of the European Union in that level. But also the example I've already mentioned, it's the vaccine development. So it's nice to see in a way that, in Europe, okay, it started mostly country by country, and each country fighting, if you want, for itself. And now, the search maybe for more common ground and European regional solutions, I think it's great to see. And to be very honest, look, in hindsight, now end of May, when I look back, I'm not very quickly impressed, yes? But I can tell you, I'm really impressed the way, many governments many institutions, but also most companies have dealt with this terrific challenge, and actually today are probably coming out of it in a stronger way. I'm just simply impressed.
So it's very interesting for us to hear this from you, because there's been a lot of criticism and a lot of write-up about the lack of international cooperation, you know, everybody fending for themselves, nationalisms, the risk of nationalism popping back up. If I hear you correctly, you seem to be, and you said you were an optimist, you seem to be saying that there was that in the first time and now we're moving back to more cooperation. You've been involved, as you say, with the Jeff Sachs in exercise and the Ban Ki-moon piece on defining the Sustainable Development Goals. And I know you've been involved in some follow-up conversation recently. So do you see more international cooperation coming out of that crisis from that perspective?
Well, I see it certainly in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I see it still a bit less in the world as a whole, but I tell you, the next big crisis, we know it, is the climate crisis. And what I don't want to slip into the climate crisis the way we have slipped into COVID-19.
Yeah.
In addition, the climate crisis is clearly, you cannot say it's unknown, okay? You can say that on COVID, which, as I said at the beginning, I don't exactly agree, because in a way it was a known unknown, but climate crisis is without discussion a known unknown. And I think what's so important now, and this again is a global topic, it's not something, you know, that can be done country by country. I do think very much that a response is needed. We have to really, many things have been done, you know, the COP in Paris and all of that. The SDGs are, I'm really happy the way they have been applied everywhere. Even, you know, like the city of Geneva is working on SDG number so and so. Wherever I go, they work on a couple of SDGs and they just call them now by numbers. So
and even us here at INSEAD, Barbara, you'd be proud.
I know, I am. I'm very proud. No, but the question really is, you know, the world for the future to solve all these topics we have, and obviously one big one is the climate crisis. We do need to reinforce the global cooperation on the level of NATO, on the level of WHO, and also on the level of WTO. So what I see there too, you know, the voice of business actually can be so important, and it could be even more important. And I think it's a time where the voice of business has to be maybe emphasized in order to bring us all in a better world in the future. I think business here has an even bigger role to play than in the past.
Thanks, Barbara. And of course, I would agree with you, but we also see that businesses right now, I mean, they're struggling, right, in terms of keeping their employees, in terms of restarting the business. So there are these very like bottom line imperative that they have to deal with in a context where GDP is dropping and unemployment is rising. So where does that, you know, sustainability agenda fit there? I mean, we can see where it could be put in the back burner because of the emergency of the rebooting the system. In the conversations that you've been part of, how do you see that playing out? Is climate change in the back burner now, or how is that being discussed?
Well, absolutely not. But I can fully understand if you're in an industry or a company that's in the kind of losing area, you know, and you have been impacted greatly by this crisis, it's maybe not the first thing on your agenda. I can understand that to a certain extent. But look at it. Firstly, a lot of the recovery funding, look now at France with Air France and so on, has a green tag attached. And I know also Ursula von der Leyen, that's her idea, you know, to have this green kind of funding. So there will clearly be funding available that has a green tag attached, and obviously, so that will reinforce the way towards more sustainable companies. The second thing is, what's interesting to know that already today, most technologies that would enable a decarbonization exist. I mean, we could solve about 2/3 of the CO2 problem of our world with what we have today, without even looking at, e-car development, batteries, etc., etc. But just what we have today. So the deployment actually can be there. And the third factor that, makes me more positive is that employees, the post-COVID employees, will be a little different, I think. They want to work more remotely because they understand that's, maybe less stressful, no commuting time and so on. And it works quite well with all the technology we have. But also the drive for purpose of employees, I think, has certainly been reinforced by this crisis. And so, sustainability is purpose. So I think all these three reasons should go in the right direction, understanding that, some companies basically have to see how they survive the next day.
Thanks. So managers and leaders should really keep that front and center as they think about recovery and engage into this rebooting that you talked about before. And more broadly, there's been a lot of momentum around, rethinking capitalism before the crisis. The business roundtable last summer assigned this, stakeholder capitalism version. It was the key topic at Davos in January. Do you see that this pandemic could derail that movement more generally, or accelerate it? What are the conversations around that in boards?
Well, obviously the conversations are diverse based on, countries, based on companies and so on. But we know we have this climate issue. Yeah, we know we use the resources of 1.7 planets and we will grow to 9 billion. So we have to, it's something just we have to work on it. And I think, they're like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is a very good platform for this. We just had meetings with them last week. I think there is great interest, and the interest also today is from the investor side. BlackRock, all the big investors, they are working on ESG, and the crisis hasn't taken that away. So I don't think it can even be in some areas an acceleration. Look at the whole digital kind of rollout that has led to actually nice CO2 effect. You see now less cars, more people if they go with bikes, or they do it like we do today in a remote way. So some areas, we already have done a couple of steps. And Greta was not able to reduce the air traffic, even with the shaming ideas and all of that. But COVID has basically done it. And probably the airline industry, I don't think it will go back to the 2019 levels in the near future.
Yeah, COVID-19 has grounded us for sure. So could you tell us a little bit more about the role of the board around all this? You mentioned the importance of having a risk plan. You mentioned having a resilient organization. What is a competent board and board member today? What are the competencies that are needed there to deal with such crisis?
I think what's very important as a board member to have a good business experience, so that you can, bring in that business experience. If it's an international company, it should ideally be internationally, that you really understand China, Brazil, US, and all of that. And the other thing, obviously, is always useful that you have we call it in McKinsey the T-shape. You have the one area which is the horizontal one, which would be the general business knowledge, and then you have a leg. And there are many legs today. It's clearly sustainability, it's supply chain, it's digitization, it's sweet spots in post-COVID markets and so on. And the interesting part, I think, in boards, what obviously will become even more important is the strategic part. And I know INSEAD has done researches, and it was always a little bit on the lower side. I think strategy was like 30% of board's time. And the area of, I call it housekeeping, compliance, EHS, financial reporting, and all of that has always been a big part. That part remains important, but it's a part that can very well be done by the company as such. good companies, you know, they know how to do that. So you inform yourself, you have your meetings and so on. I think the post-COVID way forward is becoming now a key issues, and really to go through and to say, you know, where are the opportunities, so sweet spots, but also where are many businesses will be at risk, and to recognize that early and reposition your portfolio, reposition also your innovation pipeline. I think that will be one of the key tasks. And employee health, and health meaning obviously the physical health, but I think also the motivation of the post-COVID employees and their kind of search for a purpose. I think this is also that, you know, the board has to ensure it's being addressed. And lastly, you know, in crisis, it's a challenge for managers, and not every manager has this kind of situational leadership style. So it's also, you know, it can also show maybe new talents you haven't recognized, upcoming stars, you know, that have made a great job in crisis management. So all of that, and obviously what I mentioned already, to review your supply chain, your operation kind of master plan, manufacturing plan, and have a good thought. Also, you know, what does it mean politically? I mean, is it really the right thing to be in South Korea with North Korea and all these things going on and have a single source factory there? Or should you maybe have a second one or in a safer place? So really to review basically on a white sheet from start, once more, the supply chain, but also the manufacturing footprint.
Very interesting to see you say this also, because if I bring it back to you also, I'd like to note that what we're starting this conversation about, and the fact that you have your foot in so many different organizations and conversations, helps you to stay, you know, at that strategic level of engagement at the board level. Is this something that you would concur with, and a recommendation that you will give not just to our students but to our alumni in terms of spreading their net a little wider?
Well, it is obviously, it's a personal decision, but it's extremely enriching. And the interesting part also is you can cross-fertilize, you know.
That's right. The
consumer goods industry has been quicker in sustainability adoption, for instance, as oil and gas. So you can, and it's interesting also for the management and other board members in companies, you know, if you can share such examples. The other area that I feel is important as board member, to always inform yourself in an independent way on, you know, what's going on in the industry, what's going on with your competition. And actually, the COVID crisis has created so many great webinars from all different angles.
Here we are having one.
Here we are, yes. It was fantastic, you know, to go in here, to go in there, and listen for 1 hour to an important topic. So yes, I think it's important to get your own picture and make your own picture based also on your own information, which today is available basically for everybody.
Thanks for inspiring us today by doing that. You just published also with McKinsey a specific report on the role of CFOs in crisis response. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, you know, the CFO obviously has an important, very important, as a CEO has obviously the biggest and most important role in any company. So that's as it is. The CFO, the role of the CFO today has changed. It has changed pre-COVID, but it has probably changed even more post-COVID. And just think of all these areas that come up on digitization, how to accelerate the plan, compliance, new businesses, and all of that, the supply chain architecture, etc. So the management of this crisis in terms of keeping liquidity, ensuring, you know, supplier financing, customer payments, and all of that, ensuring your balance sheet, you know, is there, is stable. So I think and obviously the CFO is the more objective role in a company than the CEO. And it's also obviously for the board important to really make sure the long-term perspective is fully applied. So what, for me, a good CFO also is, you know, somebody who may not always be of the same view as the CEO, and state that to the board so we can make our own view and opinion. And but certainly the crisis, the crisis management has been done clearly from the CEO, but the CFO has had a big role to play. And CFOs today, they can really increase their head.
That's great. Yeah, I would encourage everybody to go read the piece. It's on barbarakus.com, Barbara's website, which I would also argue for the future is important when it comes to accounting for more values than just profit. Natural capital, human capital, the role of CFO here might also be key. Maybe let me ask the students what has struck you most in what Barbara just mentioned. What did resonate most with you as you're about to graduate? Shall I start with you, Saul, maybe, because we had that ordered agreed already?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the part that I actually read is her article on McKinsey, and I really like the part in which she talked about the sustainable value creation and the sustainable business development. Although we do know that the climate change is also further conversation we need to focus on, I do really appreciate as a board, she is appreciating that, emphasizing the importance of sustainable value creation. And it seems like a lot of discussion among board members have been happening, and it's also happening across different industries, different regions. So I think that's probably a really positive side coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's great. That also resonates with me. What about you, Anna? Anything that struck you or that surprised you in what she just mentioned, or that you could take as a lesson going forward?
Yeah, I really like the optimism of Barbara, and I really like discussing globalization and how countries who are more in as the nationalist way are doing less well maybe in the crisis. And as a European, her optimism on Europe and the cooperation between countries and major companies resonates a lot, because I think it's a good message of optimism for current students.
Yeah, I agree. And that's not what you read in the paper on a daily basis. So it's good to hear it also coming from someone who is so hands-on in the management of large groups and companies right now. Maxime, anything from your end? I mean, I know you're all dying to ask a question, but you're going to have to chat with me while we wait. Anything else that strikes you or that you're wondering?
Yeah, I think I love the optimism. And one thing you can take as a lesson learned for manager here is that it's a deceleration time. So you rush into taking like short-term decision to prevent and to take care of the health of your employee. But more important, there is also an opportunity to think about your long-term strategy now, like, because when things will catch up, as she said, this deceleration time will help you to take long-term view now. That's very useful as a manager when you will drive your company.
Well, and that's super hard to do, right? Because with one hand, you have to deal with a crisis, and you need to keep your brain on the long term. So Anna, we didn't get a chance yet, because that was my last couple of questions on the role of women in boards and female leaders. What are the conversations that you've been having around that in the club at INSEAD, if any? I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but what are the key questions you're having here that we will ask her as soon as you come back in?
I think the couple questions that are on our minds are, first, a general worry that companies are going to address emergencies like drop in revenues and disrupted supply chains, and are maybe going to cut back on diversity and inclusions agendas. And like a Pearl survey just showed that at 27%.
I suggest we just move on to the question for students. They're ready, they're all warmed up, and they have great questions that they'd like to ask you. We didn't discuss, which was the last part of our conversation, Barbara, more of the role of women in board, but Anna is going to bring it up. You're next in line. You are an impact ambassador here. So over to you for the questions to Barbara.
Great. I'm actually quite curious to hear from you, Barbara, in terms of your role as a board member. What are some of your short-term and long-term strategic focus areas that you want to bring to the boardroom?
Okay, I think the first one clearly is strategy, because it has shown over and over again, without a good strategy, you can do a lot of operational improvements, but the strategy. I think that part, and that part already, before COVID has been challenging because we have these disruptive technologies. We always just talk digitization, but it's artificial intelligence. Now, in the vaccine projects, artificial intelligence is being applied to make them faster. So it's robotics, it's 3D printing. I mean, there's so many areas that are disruptive. And I think boards really have to be sure, because some of these industries of actual solutions will just not be there anymore tomorrow. And this obviously is accelerating at this moment. The second, of course, is sustainability, to really ensure that the company is able to use this, not just as a kind of a program, let's make an internal program, but really as a competitive weapon. And I give an example which I can do. It's I was 8 years a board member in Total, which is oil and gas. So you would at first sight say it's not exactly very sustainable. I very much enjoyed, I did 2 great mandates there. And just by always questioning, the green businesses, you have a certain, just by raising the right question, you can, at least you can position it a little bit. But anyhow, Total, 4 years ago, established a green sector in buying a big solar business in the US, by buying a battery company in France, and so on. So sustainability is the second one. And the third one, clearly, obviously, is the supply chain parts. I think this would be the parts that. And lastly, sorry, I forgot, it's digitization, because obviously, in my times in Philips and in Siemens, we introduced a lot of digital solutions. And, one thing is to know it from the outside, but, it's, I think, very important to understand how a digital transformation goes in a company, which is not the easy part. The easier part is to choose the right solution, but then to make sure it happens in a company, it's quite challenging. So I think this would be the contribution that I'm making.
Yeah, I think this is really great. And just tying those questions to the next question is, to those companies like Total, which we don't conventionally think is green, focus on green, let's say green technology, how do you start the conversation to say, we need to start focusing on sustainability, we need to also start focusing on digitization? How do you initiate the conversation in which a company themselves might not be too open to them?
Yeah, obviously in boards, you always have, at least once a year, you have a big strategy day where, the management presents a strategy. And these are typical moments where you can bring this up. Now, my experience has been, when I joined Philips, it was really for the supply chain. And then 2 years later, they also gave me sustainability. And I thought, how should I tackle that? And the way I decided to tackle it was to position it as a business opportunity. So in Philips at that time, we had the LED technology, green lighting. So basically I said, look, sustainability for Philips is green lighting, because, you had a 30% CO2 reduction. Philips had the technology, and so it was understandable. So the way you position it, I think, in a company, in a board, is to say, here, this is the business opportunity. This is the solution we have. This is the technology we have. Let's go in that direction. And then obviously you can also offer yourself as a source for contribution. I, for instance, did in a number of companies. I attended their sustainability events. I made reviews with the sustainability management and so on. So that's another area that you can bring into play.
Absolutely. Having that perfect combination of that sustainability as well as the business opportunity is probably key to that successful conversation.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Good questions.
Yeah, that's great, Sol, because also sustainability, supply chains, I mean, these issues are connected, right? This is where you will find most of your footprint. So it's interesting to see these 3 elements you're bringing together, which are also interconnected. Anna, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. I wanted to discuss a bit more with you the issues revolving around women in business. And my first question would be that we saw during the 2008 and 9 financial crisis that banks with a higher share of women on their board were more stable than their peers, and I based on McKinsey research, my question. And my question is nowadays, which industry was better prepared? And do you see any correlation with diversity on boards, knowing that women are more likely to apply behaviors that are necessary facing a global challenge, as participative decision-making, trust, showing trust? So which one was better prepared, and did you see any correlation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it would have been difficult to measure that. So don't ask me for a statistic, for the stats. No, but you know, when I look at the world, we are not going in the same ways as we have done in the past. The world forward is a new world, it's a different world. So what we need a lot of innovation, and we need a lot of creativity, and we need out of the box thinking. And obviously, and you know, all of us have been in mixed teams, I think, and the experience on your mixed teams is that it's just more fruitful, it's more enriching. There are more different ideas, you discuss more, then you have, you know, all the same kind of personality. And for me, the diversity is extremely important going forward. And the diversity obviously is women, that's clear. They do bring a different perspectives. Also, what I recognize, sometimes the more longer term perspective and the broader perspective, you know, also to think about the health, the people, the employees. I think this is just the experience I have so far, that in boards with, you know, women colleagues, this is probably something that we emphasize even more. But it's also different experiences, you know, it's different backgrounds, it's different personalities. I think that makes the mix. But clearly diversity going forward becomes even more important in the future for companies, and not just companies, but also companies.
Thank you. Yeah, we agree. And I think building on what you're saying, I think we're larger than women about all the diversity and inclusion initiatives. As companies are facing emergencies, Katell asked you about the sustainability agenda. I would like to ask you about the diversity and inclusion agendas, because when revenues are dropping and supply chains are disrupted, how can you prevent organization against putting on hold the diversity and inclusion initiatives?
I don't think any company, I haven't seen yet any companies putting that on hold, because I think companies start to realize that this is something very enriching and helping the organization moving forward. And to be very honest today, you know, comparing you now, finishing your MBA versus during our times, you have so many opportunities today. I mean, I don't know any company that hasn't a specific plan, you know, to emphasize, to enhance and so on, the part of women in their organization. So I think you're there, you can really make the choice today. And I don't see that, you know, being reduced because of COVID. To the contrary, because there's more healthcare topics, there's more topics also going into our direction, you know, services, healthcare, digital, these are all spaces, not like, you know, steel, oil and gas and so on. These are more also places where, you know, women have a natural access to.
Thank you, Anna, for great question, and thanks, Barbara. And even we could also argue, as you mentioned before, Barbara, that we need diversity in strategic thinking so that we don't have any blind spots, right? So we're going to need that even more moving forward. Maxime, you're up and you're next. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to know, you talk about taking care of your employee and your health and the operation. I love that. We still have to navigate through the crisis. So how important you will say is it or no to create a sense of emergency within your team when something like that happens?
I think the sense of emergency is important. I think here it was just there, basically. you know, because you didn't have to announce a big transformation plan, but it was done. You had to watch some evening news and see what's going on in the Italian hospital. And I think everybody, I mean, I think employees during this time, they also looked for comfort. You know, they also looked for humanity from their employers. And they also looked for an insurance for their future. So there were different elements, I think, than in a normal kind of a transformation plan. And I think that was it. You know, the companies that did successfully this crisis so far, it's not finished. I think they have taken a lot of care, you know, be in touch with them. Communication was extremely honest communication, you know, also saying we don't really know. Yes, because we didn't know, and we still don't know 100% what it is all about. Exactly. So honest communication, you know, a lot of information by the management, taking care of everybody, and it has affected everybody. It has affected some even more.
That's a very positive message. I love it. So also more macro view. You mentioned about the government, how some governments react on a national way. What do you think the role of government will be to support private sector now?
Well, I think the role, most governments have already recognized that they have to do something. You know, I think a good example, not on the Swisscom, but a good example has been, I think, the Swiss government, because in a record time, you know, Swiss government normally takes them 10 years or something, huh? Very long term. But here, like in 2 weeks, you know, or 3 weeks, they created a very good recovery funding for enterprises. And without any, in like 1 day, you could get support from your bank. So, and I know Germany is working on it. In France, there are plans. I think it's very, very important. Because what you don't want is that companies that have actually a future, you know, and should continue to go, that they will not survive and go bankrupt because of a liquidity issue. That you don't want.
Yeah, and you don't want that, but the hardest part will be we have to give to everyone, so everyone survive. You cannot select. That's what you're saying, of course.
No, it's clear. But I think important is just to be sure that these ships are floating. You know, they continue to work. And I like this approach in Switzerland because it was totally normally they would make, you know, 2 weeks of due diligence and so on. And here. Basically, I think the banks had to, within 1 day, they had to just release the funding for companies. So I think these are the situations where probably this kind of moves are important, and especially to ensure that not the losers, you know, the ones that you know already now will be, you know, future is not exactly clear. I think there you have to help with the transformation and transition. But all the others, you know, because of just short-term liquidity, then to basically not survive, I don't think that's the right policy.
Amazing. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much to the three of you, and thank you, Barbara. Clearly, also the public-private, we can sound a little lofty, is going to be in the future, short-term and medium-term, extremely important for whatever kind of jobs any of you will be taking. Something to keep in mind. So. Barbara, you the ever optimist. You convey that to us today, inspiring us. Can you tell us, looking ahead in let's say the coming year, what are you the most excited about when it comes to building back better for all of us? Can you give us a sense of the 2-3 things that you're the most excited about looking ahead?
Well, I see. You know, what really is for me very exciting is there is kind of a wave of innovation around us, and that has really accelerated tremendously in the last 2 months. It's all around, you know, the vaccine and medication. It's all around digitization, and it's all around hygiene services and so on, Amazon, HelloFresh. So, I mean, these kind of companies really have had a boost, and they're huge pockets. And I think that's also interesting for the MBA students who are, looking for market opportunities. My advice, I've always gone for challenging roles, and ideally, obviously, it's linked to growth. For instance, opening up Eastern Europe was a big growth story for Nestle and ABB. So, and it's more fun, to be honest, to work in spaces that grow. Because you grow yourself, you get bigger roles, you can shape more, and so on. So I think that will part. And the other thing that really has given me a lot of confidence is the way, as I said at the beginning, governments, but also most companies, have been able to run this crisis. I think it shows the strengths of leadership, the strengths of the employees, and of management at large. So I think that gives me a lot of confidence going forward.
Thank you, Barbara. So all alumni and other online take good note for which board you should be joining, and students for which industry you should keep your eye on. My last question is for the students. 500 of them are graduating, I think in a few weeks only, and obviously they're graduating in rather uncertain and challenging context when it comes to finding a job and taking the next step in their career. So what's the advice you're giving them? What are the key top advice you're giving them?
Yes, times are very challenging, and it was easier, I think, when I graduated. I have to admit, it's not an easy time. But on the other hand, it's also time where you have the privilege to step back and rethink how you can contribute to a better world, in what area. And maybe just a short quote from John F. Kennedy, 1951, I think is interesting. And he said, young college graduates would find a full life in bringing technical advice and assistance to the underprivileged. Now, I want to bit reformulate it. I would just say the MBAs bring advice and assistance to create a better world. And isn't that great? Because you really can think big and do that. Because, in 20 years from now, when you look back, it's so important that you say, oh, this was really great. And I was able to shape something. And with the MBA in your hands, it's such a great study. It's such a great platform. You can do so much. You can really change the world in many places. And there is a need for that today, I think, more than ever. So that would be my advice.
Thanks, Barbara. So I think that deserves a virtual round of applause to close our session. Thank you so much, Barbara, for coming back home and sharing your insights with us. Thank you so, Anna and Maxime, for helping me in time of crisis today. And thanks to everybody who logged in. Just a few cues that this is being recorded, and it will be slightly edited, but you can find the conversation online. If you want to hear more about women in business as a response, we have a webinar on 9 June. We have a conversation on sustainability in board on 30 June. So keep your eyes out for that. Huge thank you finally for the team making it happen. Katya, Nandini, and all the team behind these webinars who have also helped us managing this little impromptu interval. Stay safe. See you soon, and all the best to all of you. Goodbye.